The first sign that something was wrong in Penrose wasn't the sight of police cars or hazmat suits. It was the smell. People described it differently depending on who you asked. Some said it reminded them of spoiled meat left in the sun. Others said it was sweeter, heavier, almost chemical, like something that didn't belong in the air of a quiet Colorado town. But everyone agreed on one thing. Whatever it wasn't fading. It grew stronger as the days grew colder, drifting through windows, settling into the seams of people's clothes, clinging to the edges of their homes until even laundry couldn't escape it. Residents kept trying to explain it away. Penrose wasn't a big place, and strange smells weren't exactly unusual when the wind shifted across farmland. At first, people blamed a dead deer in the drainage ditch, or maybe a rancher disposing of livestock. But deep down, they knew those explanations didn't hold. Not when the odor lingered for weeks, even on days when the air barely moved. Not when people started gagging as they stepped outside. Not when children refused to play in their own yards. Some nights, the smell seemed to swell with the darkness. Parents lay awake, breathing through shirts or towels, wondering what natural thing could possibly decay this long, this violently. And still, no one thought to blame the building sitting silently off the main road, the Return to Nature funeral home. The funeral home had always blended into the town. It wasn't grand or elegant or even particularly well-kept. Just a beige, boxy structure with a metal door and a modest wooden sign. People trusted it because they needed to trust it. It promised green burials, a gentle return of the dead to the earth, an eco-friendly alternative to the sterile coldness of cremation machines and embalming tables. Families clung to that promise when they lost someone. A mother, a father, a child. The funeral home was supposed to be the last place those loved ones were cared for. But by early October of 2023, something about that building had changed. Neighbors began noticing the windows were always shut tight, even on hot days. Delivery trucks stopped coming. No lights glowed inside at night. And that smell, it seemed to radiate from the funeral home's direction, creeping out across the grass and rising into the air like a warning no one wanted to believe. It wasn't until one resident finally called the sheriff's office that officials stepped in. The caller didn't speak in dramatic terms. They simply said, "You need to come smell this for yourself." That was enough. Deputies arrived and approached the building, but even before they reached the door, they stumbled. The odor hit them with a heaviness that felt physical, like something pushing back against their lungs. One deputy later described it as walking into a wall of rot. They requested a warrant immediately. When investigators finally pushed open the metal door, the darkness inside swallowed the daylight behind them. Their flashlights cut thin yellow arcs across the interior, but it didn't matter. The smell told them the truth before the light did. This wasn't one dead body. It wasn't 10. It was something far worse. The first thing they saw was a table. On top of it lay a human form, loosely wrapped, limbs stiffened into unnatural angles. The decomposition was so advanced that even the slightest movement sent up waves of air thickened with decay. But when they turned their lights beyond that first body, they saw more. Dozens more. Some on the floor. Some stacked on top of each other. Some slumped against walls as though they had been left standing before collapsing into themselves. Investigators stood frozen for several seconds. Their minds tried to find any explanation other than the one forming before them. But there was none. The room temperature building, without refrigeration, without ventilation, held death in every corner. Some bodies had been there for months, others for years. The scene devoured their senses. The floors glistened with fluids that seeped into the grout, dried, then re-wetted with the next layer of rot. Insects crawled in frantic patterns across surfaces, as if disturbed by the sudden light. The air felt humid, clinging to their skin, making every breath a battle between instinct and duty. One investigator stepped back out of the building to vomit. Another whispered, "There's no way this is real." But it was. And as they continued counting, the number of deceased rose past what any of them could have imagined. Past 50. Past 100. Beyond. Outside, The sun dipped below the trees, and the emergency lights painted the building in red and blue. Neighbors gathered in uneasy clusters, trying to understand how something like this could happen in their quiet town. Phones rang across Colorado as families began to hear rumors. People who trusted this funeral home. People who had been handed urns. People who believed their loved ones had been honored. They didn't know yet what investigators were discovering inside. They didn't know the truth. Not yet. But the truth was coming. And it would break them. By the time additional teams arrived, the building was already surrounded by flashing lights and officers wearing masks over their faces. The smell leaked through the seams of the structure, like a living thing trying to escape. When the hazmat crew stepped inside, even they stopped short. Experienced men and women, people who had seen crash sites, fires, disaster zones, stood frozen in disbelief. Their boots stuck slightly to the floor with each step, making faint peeling sounds in the silence, as though the building itself wanted to hold them back. They moved deeper inside. Their flashlights revealed a room that once served as a preparation area, but now resembled something entirely different. Plastic sheets hung from the ceiling but were smeared with dark stains, sagging under the weight of insects nesting behind them. The tables meant for washing and dressing the dead were coated with layers of dust and residue. And the bodies, they were everywhere. Some wrapped in sheets that had long since fused to the decomposing skin. Others barely covered, limbs stiffened into shapes that suggested they had been placed down carelessly, without dignity or order. One investigator knelt beside a form that looked impossibly small. A child. The little body's bag had torn open, revealing what should never have been seen by anyone outside a controlled, respectful mortuary. The investigator's breath hitched. His hand hovered over his mouth, as if trying to keep the horror from entering any further. He whispered something no one else heard, a quiet apology, perhaps, to the child or to the world that allowed this to happen. Another officer, farther inside the building, discovered a cluster of bodies stacked so tightly together their outlines blurred into one another. Their tags, if they had any, were soaked, torn, or completely missing. Some were marked only with scraps of paper, others with nothing at all. They had been left to lie against one another in the humid, stagnant air as time erased the identities they once carried. The deeper the teams moved, the more the truth revealed itself. This was not a recent collapse. This was years of neglect tucked behind a simple beige wall in a trusting community. The funeral home had gone dark long before the smell reached the neighbors. Records would later show that some of the bodies had been sitting here since before the pandemic. Families had been given ashes that might not have belonged to anyone related to them. Some urns held substances that weren't even human. But inside the building, investigators couldn't think about the betrayal yet. They were too busy navigating the physical reality of what those lies created. The lights buzzed overhead, struggling to stay lit. The air felt warmer the deeper they moved. A few of the team members had to step outside for fresh air, the smell clinging to their clothing and hair. One officer pressed her back against the side of the building, tears brightening her eyes as she gulped the cold air like a drowning person breaking the surface. "They left them here," she whispered to no one. "They left all of them here." Back inside, the most experienced members of the team tried to establish a system. They marked locations. They photographed everything. They moved carefully, respectfully, even though the scene demanded speed. But you cannot rush the dead. Not when they've already been failed so completely. Every few minutes, another body bag was brought inside. The teams gently transferred remains into them. They tried not to disturb the fragile state of the bodies, many of which were so decomposed that even the slightest shift caused them to collapse into themselves. The process was slow, and with every new discovery, the building felt heavier, as though grief itself pressed down on the walls. At one point, a hazmat worker paused with a clipboard. He stared down the hallway lined with bodies, then looked at the growing list of numbers. He whispered, "This can't be right." But the numbers kept rising. 60, 80, 100. More. Outside, the town gathered. People stood wrapped in jackets against the evening cold, staring at the funeral home with expressions of disbelief and nausea. Some had family members inside that building. Some were unsure. Some had friends who had used return to nature months earlier. And the fear spread quietly through the crowd. What if? A woman arrived in her slippers, shaking, clutching an urn to her chest. She pushed past the tape until officers gently stopped her. She kept looking at the building, whispering her daughter's name over and over. She had thought her daughter's ashes were resting on her nightstand. Now she wasn't sure of anything. The officers couldn't tell her otherwise. They didn't yet know how many families had been lied to, but the weight of that uncertainty pressed down on everyone around them. Inside the building, a lead investigator spoke softly into a recorder, his voice steady but strained. This scene is consistent with long-term improper storage of human remains. No refrigeration. No documentation. Severe decomposition throughout the structure. He hesitated before adding, almost in a whisper, "This is one of the worst cases I've seen in my career." The team continued working long after darkness swallowed the town. Floodlights illuminated the outside, casting long shadows across the cracked parking lot. The building that once promised gentle, natural care for the deceased now resembled an abandoned warehouse, hollow and broken. One by one, the bodies were removed. Each time a stretcher rolled out, the crowd outside grew quieter. Faces grew paler. Someone sobbed loud enough to echo across the lot. Someone else collapsed into the arms of a neighbor. Officers looked down, unable to meet their eyes. By midnight, it was clear that this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a betrayal of unimaginable scale. And tomorrow, the world would know.